Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we're looking at a controversy sparked by the Delhi police in its supplementary charge sheet in a Northeast Delhi riots case. We're also looking at how the state of Tripura is dealing with a rising death toll with just one hospital providing ICU facilities for COVID-19 patients from across the state. We'll also take a quick look at an export ban on onions. But first, a quick note about an Indian Express exclusive. On Monday, the Indian Express reported about how a database developed by a Shenzhen-based company in China and with links to the Chinese government was monitoring over 1,300 high-profile Indians through their online presence. The firm, Zenwa Data Information Technology, targets individuals and institutions in politics, government, business, technology, media, and civil society. It claims to work with the Chinese intelligence, military, and security agencies. The IT firm monitors a subject's digital footprint, maintains an information library, and also builds a relational database, which records and describes associations between individuals, institutions, and information. The collection of data becomes a worry given a string of recent reports on China's attempts to cultivate potential assets for sensitive military, intelligence, or economic information in the US and Europe through social media. In the coming days, the Indian Express will be revealing more about this firm and the data it collects. We'll be talking about this mysterious firm and its impact of its operations in a future episode of this podcast. Keep listening. In a supplementary charge sheet filed against 3 women who are accused of being involved in sparking the riots in Delhi in February, the Delhi police has said that the anti-CAA and anti-NRC protests in the capital were held to malign the image of the national government. But in this supplementary charge sheet were statements by the accused that had some surprising names. CPM General Secretary Sitaram Yechuri, Swaraj Abhiyan leader Yogendra Yadav, economist Jayati Ghosh, Delhi University Professor Apurvanand, and documentary filmmaker Rahul Roy are among those whose names find mention for allegedly playing different roles. All these names figure in the 3 disclosure statements that the Delhi police claims was made by the accused in the case. Anand Mohan, who is covering the court proceedings in the Delhi riots case for the Indian Express, says that disclosure statement isn't really a legal term and is far from being considered as evidence in the case.
This is used in the context of Section 27 of the Indian Evidence Act. So this section basically put to what we call a disclosure statement. And as per this section, it sort of like allows the limited use of information which an accused may have disclosed to the police while in custody. And this can be used as evidence. Basically, this section states that there's this unknown fact which is discovered when the accused gave information to the police. And this may be used as evidence. However, this comes with a rider because what part of that evidence be accepted during a trial will be decided by the court. If you go through the Evidence Act and if you go through the various judgments given by the courts over the past few years, what becomes clear is that confessions made before police officers is actually inadmissible as evidence. And Section 25 actually of the Indian Evidence Act actually makes this quite clear, and the following sections also lay down several safeguards against these confessional statements made to the police.
Such statements are not considered as evidence to eliminate the possibility of investigating agencies or police using force or torture to get accused to make statements that incriminate themselves or others. Anand says that what usually stands the scrutiny of a trial is a statement made before a magistrate.
Now, that can be used as evidence because proper procedures followed where the magistrate also informs the accused that whatever you're going to tell me can be used as evidence in court.
However, that doesn't mean that police can't act on the basis of such disclosure statements. Anand explains what the police can do.
In that, a disclosure statement may, let's say that a name crops up. So the police, as per conversations with lawyers that we've had, they've also clarified that the police can move against them on the basis of this disclosure statement. But then again, when it comes to prosecuting these people and when it comes to conviction, the burden of proof is really heavy. I mean, they have to actually show some concrete evidence to show the culpability of the accused.
Aranya Shankar, who also reported on this development, explained why these statements stand out.
The disclosure statements that are part of this supplementary charge sheet are of the 3 accused, which are the 2 Pinjra Tod members, Devangana Kalita and Natasha Narwal, who are also students of JNU, And the third statement is of Jamia Millia Islamia student Gulfisha Fatima. And this FIR on which this charge sheet has been filed basically has to do with the murder of a 18-year-old man during the riots. The original charge sheets, this is a supplementary charge sheet. In the original charge sheet, the police had said that he died when a bullet sort of bounced off a pillar and hit him during the riots. The FIR has to do with the murder of this 18-year-old man. What we found in the supplementary charge sheet and in the disclosure statements that the police is basically talking all about protests, the anti-CA protests and the mobilization of these protests and the logistics of these protests, rather than focusing on the murder investigation.
The charge sheet against members of women's rights group Pinjra Tod, Devangana Kalita and Natasha Narwal, and Jamia Millia Islamia student Gulfisha Fatima had been filed earlier. But what is their alleged role?
The reason these three were made accused in the FIR is because allegedly they are supposed to have played a role in the murder of this man. But in the charge sheet, there is no evidence or even any kind of direct statement which says that they were responsible. So what they're trying to say in the charge sheet is basically that these three people in their capacities were organizing all these anti-CA protests, and they are alleged to have used their knowledge as educated students to provoke and instigate the Muslim crowd coming to these protests deliberately and sort of get the two communities to start the riot.
Aranya also points out that prominent names like Yechuri and others that have been mentioned in the supplementary charge sheet are accused of different things.
Yogendra Yadav, Sitaram Yechuri, all of these people have been named in the charge sheet, but they are not accused. But at the same time, Yogendra Yadav, Sitaram Yechuri, and say Ajayati Ghosh, their roles are not the same, even in the whatever alleged disclosure statements, which I should mention that are not signed by the accused. So they are saying that Yogendra Yadav, Sitaram Yechuri's role was provoking and mobilizing the crowd. Whereas, Jayati Ghosh and filmmaker Rahul Roy and DU Professor Apurvanand, these three names figure as sort of, people who are giving directions to Devangana and Natasha how to organize the protest.
But in this case, the statements allegedly made by two of these women haven't even been signed by them. How much does this affect its value as evidence? Anand says it will come down to the court that will hear the trial.
The Supreme Court has also held in the past that the absence of signatures in a disclosure statement does cast doubts on credibility. But then there are those who also argue that under this section 27, right, which deals with all of this, it does not specify whether the person who is making the statement needs to sign it or affix it some impression on it. Again, all of this comes down to the courts.
Then there's also the fact that the statements made by the two accused have identical wordings, language, and even the same spelling mistakes. What about that aspect?
The lawyers for the accused have also informed us that it does raise doubts on the police version. They say that these disclosure statements are made independently. They don't sit together and make these statements. They're on two separate days and two separate dates. So disclosure statements, word to word and from phrase to phrase, including spelling mistakes, cannot be identical. It's difficult to believe, which is why the lawyers say that it is because of these reasons that disclosure statements are not admissible as evidence.
But finally, it comes down to the trial court and what it chooses to consider as evidence and what to reject. Anand says that that's still some time away, given the police are still at the stage of filing charge sheets.
There is a stage in which there is an argument on whether the charge sheet can be admitted or not, where you take cognizance of the charge sheet. Once the cognizance of a charge sheet is taken, and then you fix charges, and then you proceed with trial. So it's still in a very nascent stage. I mean, there's a long road to go ahead. And the police have also informed that they are going to file more supplementary charge sheets in these cases. So these charge sheets will be kept filing over the course of time. So that's where we are right now.
Those named in the supplementary charge sheet have strongly criticized the Delhi police. In an interview to a website, here's what CPM Sitaram Yechuri had to say.
The police is acting directly under directions from the Union Home Ministry, and there's a political motivation to this. It is not really the question of delivering justice, establishing the truth, but to actually axe their political grind. So this is what it appears from this.
Swaraj Abhiyan leader Yogendra Yadav also criticized the filing of these statements, saying that they were an attempt to discredit protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens.
कि क्या ये किसी षड्यंत्र की जांच हो रही है या कि ये जांच ही अपने आप में षड्यंत्र है.
But Aranya points out that not all those who have been named have issued any statement so far.
Jayati Ghosh and Rahul Roy have actually not commented on their names. They've refused comment. But the larger point that I think everybody named in this charge sheet has made is that the Delhi police's efforts are all in trying to probe the anti-CA protests. And they're trying to draw a link between these protests and the riots, quote unquote, criminalizing the protests. So instead of actually probing into the source of the violence, say, for example, they've made this point of why is there no mention of BJP leader Kapil Mishra, who had, just a day before the riots broke out, said that if the police does not move them, I'll be forced to take matters into my own hand. So they are basically saying that the actual crux of the investigation should have been on trying to find out what started the violence, but they're busy criminalizing the anti-CA protests and anyone and everyone who was associated with it.
Documentary filmmakers Rahul Roy, whose name featured in the supplementary charge sheet, and Sabah Diwan were called to a police station to cooperate with the investigation on Monday. The supplementary charge sheet and the statements filed by the police also mentioned former JNU student Umar Khalid, who was arrested on Sunday. Khalid was produced before a court where he was remanded to police custody for the next 10 days. And how has the Delhi police reacted to the criticism it has faced over these disclosure statements and these allegations?
They've said that the disclosure statements were recorded very truthfully, honestly, but they've also said that only the disclosure statement will not count. There has to be corroborative evidence to support taking this further in law. But at the same time, they're also saying, they put out a statement yesterday where they said that their probe has been very fair. They said whoever is doubting what is there in these disclosure statements is motivated and that things have been taken out of context. And they've said if anybody has a problem, they should go to the court of law. So they're not really saying per se what they plan to do with the disclosure statement. But it seems to me that this is going to be used as another thing to prove their case, which is that these three people were responsible for the riots.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say that they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there's perhaps no other place that does this better than the Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of the newspaper, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log into indianexpress.com/explained and access their coverage 24/7. Explained by the Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Last week, the Tripura High Court pulled up the state government over its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. We asked Debraj Deb, who reports on the state of Tripura for the Indian Express, about why this happened.
This is partially because the Tripura High Court had taken into cognizance several media reports, contemporary media reports, which spoke about the kind of alleged negligence in treatment of COVID patients in hospitals and people dying at such a high rate. Tripura has a mortality rate of more than 1%, which is actually one of the highest mortality rates in the entire Northeast region. And due to these issues, the court specifically said that it is time for the court to seek the truth from the government, to understand what kind of preparations the government is taking, what steps have been taken in place to contain the COVID threat. In such a small state of Tripura, we have more than 192, 194 deaths till now. So this huge surge in COVID in Tripura, since especially August and September, the court has especially taken that thing into cognizance and said it wants to know the actual nature of treatment going on in the ground, while it also allows the government to do its job and not interfere therein.
Debraj says the situation in Tripura is escalating very fast, and there's just one hospital in the state dealing with patients that need intensive care, and that's in the capital, Agartala.
The doctors who are in charge of this whole COVID treatment at Govind Ballabh Pant Hospital, GBP Hospital, which is the only dedicated COVID hospital of Tripura right now, apart from several other COVID care centers, COVID health centers, of course. But doctors in charge of this dedicated COVID hospital are telling that there is a huge number of new COVID patients coming up in the last couple of months, especially August and September. And the doctors say the alarming factor about this is that There are a large number of patients who have no recent travel history, no recent contact history with any identified patients, indicating there might be a chance of transmission of virus beyond the common routes of transmission, like coming in contact with the patient or having recent travel history to the affected areas. So, though the doctors have not specifically said that there is a community transmission going on, but they have said that there is a high possibility of having community transmission in the next couple of weeks if the number is not checked right now. So West Tripura district, which is also having the capital city of the state, Agartala, this is worst affected by COVID right now. And more than 31% of all the new patients being identified these days, they are coming from West Tripura district alone. And Agartala city, the capital city of Tripura, is especially vulnerable on this COVID issue. And the Agartala Municipal Corporation has identified several vulnerable spots where this municipal corporation and the health department are holding regular tests through antigen tests and all these things in several market areas, public places, to identify if the chain of transmission is going more or it is lessening down.
So, what challenges does this present for the state?
Both the government and the doctors who are treating these patients at GBP, both of them have said one of the major challenges is that people are afraid to speak up that they might have COVID. And one of the reasons about this is, as we have spoken to many people while reporting on this COVID issue in Tripura, is that there are several videos, purported videos of bodies lying around in the GPP hospital going viral on social media, and people going live on Facebook or other social media from the hospital saying the treatment is very bad in there and doctors are not coming around, and other complications they're facing in the hospital. So these videos that are going online and several news items which are describing the dismal pictures inside the hospitals, people are very afraid because of this. And a recent survey was done, door-to-door survey was done across all the 8 districts of Tripura to find out how much percentage of the population might be affected by coronavirus. And the doctors themselves have said the findings of that survey and the actual figures on ground are not matching, which is because of the fact that people are not speaking the truth. They are trying to hide the fact that they might have coronavirus. Any fever, any corona-like symptoms are not being properly reported. People come in the hospitals at the very fag end of their illness, by when it is almost untreatable.
Debraj says another issue in the state that has 8 districts is that there aren't adequate facilities to treat COVID-19 patients. He says there are many levels of treatment set up by the government, like COVID care and COVID health centers, but it's not really working out.
Even till a couple of weeks back, all the patients who were there in the districts, anybody who was identified preliminarily screened as corona positive in the rapid antigen test, they were all pushed towards Agartala, leading to a very abnormal pressure on this GBP hospital. The hospital had 180 beds. It was ramped up to 240. Even now, there are more than 240 patients in the hospital on an average basis in the corona ward, the COVID ward. People are lying on the floors, in mattress, even the bare floor in many cases.
So why is there such a rush for one hospital?
GBP hospital has all the facilities. It is the nodal treatment authority, the center of COVID in Tripura. It is the apex COVID hospital in Tripura. But there are many other hospitals. These hospitals should have ideally, arrested the flow of all corona patients towards Agartala, except the very serious ones, which they did not. So this is one of the main problems that has led to this situation. Yes, though GBP is the only dedicated COVID hospital, it doesn't essentially have to take all the load. See, many patients are coming asymptomatic. Most of the patients are mildly symptomatic. Only the severe patients, even the guidelines of the government, which first came in May this year, said that the dedicated COVID hospital would treat only the severe and most vulnerable patients. Those maybe having comorbidities or veteran people having severe respiratory ailments, collapsing organs. These people would be perhaps shifted to GBP hospital.
Debraj says that Chief Minister Biplab Deb took cognizance of this problem after the rise in the number of deaths. Debraj says the Chief Minister is now travelling to multiple district hospitals and the state has ramped up its testing capacity for COVID-19.
He has asked them to make sure that their ICUs are converted to corona ICUs, at least one of them in those cases. He has said that ventilators, essential drugs, injections, and oxygen-enabled beds, all these things that are essential for corona isolation and corona treatment, these things will be dispatched from Agartala to those districts on an emergency basis. And the government is very, very keen on making sure that the pressure on GBP is lessened. But that, of course, doesn't mean that more COVID hospitals cannot come up. I guess the government has to probably think of that again.
Debraj says another issue was the fact that the government didn't open private hospitals to provide healthcare.
The private hospitals in Agartala There are roughly 17 private hospitals which were recently approved by the government to hold antigen testing and all these things. And the government has said that they are ready to approve any hospital permission for hosting COVID patients. Now, we don't have any figures like this, how many hospitals have actually come up with this. But I think the public hospitals have done its bit. It's now also the part of the private hospitals to actually get roped in and do their part. And I think the patient load is too high for any one or two apex hospital to be shouldered by. So there are many other private hospitals, private nursing homes in Agartala, which have the ability and the infrastructure to hold this kind of job. I think they should be properly roped in to, boost the ability and the infrastructure of COVID treatment. That is one thing the government should probably look at.
He points out that it might have helped to rope them in earlier to deal with the pandemic and lessen the load on the government hospital in the state capital.
We have a private hospital in Agartala which has got its own oxygen manufacturing unit. Why I'm mentioning oxygen is that oxygen supply was one of the main important issues that came to attention till last week, as many of the government hospitals were having shortage of oxygen supplies. And many patients who died in the hospitals had their relatives coming online and saying that, wow, my father or my brother were not given oxygen, and that's the reason he died. One of these, we also reported exclusively on this thing in one case where a veteran person of 75 years of age sat on a wheelchair in front of a hospital in Gomti district and died there gasping for breath because he was not given oxygen. So the oxygen was one very important thing. These facilities like oxygen, like proper care, these things are very easily available in the private hospitals, and they were not given the permission till last week. So I think, yes, this was one of the reasons why GBP had to probably shoulder this huge pressure on itself, which could have been easily handled.
The central government has banned the export of all varieties of onions with immediate effect. A price check mechanism it has employed before, the government said that the move is aimed at increasing availability and controlling onion prices in India. The government's decision came after the consumer price index-based retail inflation was at 6.69% in August, marginally down from 6.73% in July. The data was released early in the day. As per the data, overall food inflation reduced marginally, but the prices of vegetables and fruits had witnessed a rise. You were listening to The Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Arun George, and as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.